I don't even know where to start, but maybe the only way to make sense of this is to go back to the beginning, to the version of me who thought love was unshakable, solid, and safe. If you had asked me a year ago, I would have told you that my marriage was perfect, not flawless. Of course, no marriage is but solid in all the ways that really mattered. I trusted my husband Mark more than anyone else on this planet, and honestly, I still want to trust him. God, I want to. We've been together for 9 years, married for 5. Mark has always been one of those people who just lights up a room, the kind of man who somehow manages to make everyone around him feel like they matter. He's funny in that effortless way, charming without even realizing it, and for as long as I can remember, people, women especially, have been drawn to him, and I've always loved that about him. I know that sounds strange, right? A lot of people would feel threatened by that, but I never did. I liked watching other people fall under his spell, and knowing that at the end of the day, he came home to me. It was our thing, kind of like a quiet little inside joke. But lately, I don't laugh about it anymore. It started a few months ago when Mark got a new job at a tech company in downtown Austin. It's a smaller office, about 30 employees, but it's the first time in our entire relationship that he's worked closely with women. Before this, he was in construction management, mostly guys on his crews. Rough humor, late nights, nothing that ever made me pause. But this job is different. At first, I was proud of him. He's been talking about wanting a career shift for years, and when he landed this position, we celebrated over dinner at Franklin's barbecue, splitting ribs and brisket under the soft yellow lights, while we joked about corporate Mark and his new life behind a desk. I remember teasing him about trading his steel-toed boots for button-down shirts and fancy coffee, and he seemed happy, really happy. But somewhere between the second and third month, the way he talked about work changed. He started mentioning this one girl, Jenna. I can't remember the first time he said her name, but I remember the way he said it, like he was trying not to make a big deal out of it, but she kept coming up in conversation. It started small. A funny story about something that happened in a meeting, or a joke she told that had him laughing harder than usual. I didn't think much of it at first. People have work friends, I do too, but then it started happening more. Jenna became a regular part of our dinner table conversations. I learned she was 27, recently separated, sharing a house with her ex-boyfriend because neither of them could afford to move out yet. One night, Mark mentioned that she'd slept with someone else's husband. Not him, of course, but another guy from work. And she told him about it like some kind of confession. And that's when I felt it, that first little crack in the foundation. Because why was she telling my husband something like that? I brushed it off at first, tried to convince myself it was harmless, but something about it lodged itself deep in my chest. And when I asked him why she'd even share something so personal, he just shrugged, said, I don't know, babe, people just talk to me. And that's true. They always have. But this felt different. Last week, I finally broke and looked Jenna up on Facebook. I don't even know why I did it, maybe to put a face to the name, maybe to prove to myself that there was nothing to worry about. But when I saw her photos, the glossy brown hair, the soft green eyes, the effortless kind of beauty you only see in people who don't even realize they're beautiful, my stomach dropped. When I told Mark that I'd looked her up and admitted that she was pretty, I thought he'd reassure me. I thought he'd smile, pull me close, tell me I had nothing to worry about, the way he always used to. But instead he laughed. Well, he said, you did it to yourself. I smiled back, but inside, something sharp and cold settled under my ribs, and now I can't stop thinking about it. The way his face lights up when he talks about her, the way he suddenly started staying late at the office, a couple nights a week, not suspiciously, not even enough to raise an alarm, just enough to notice. The way he's been quieter at home, distracted, like his head's somewhere else. Maybe nothing's happened. Maybe nothing ever will. But there's a voice in the back of my mind whispering that this is how it starts. Not with lies, not with secrecy, but with little moments, small, invisible shifts in the way someone looks at you. I keep replaying every interaction we've had lately, every glance, every laugh, every time his phone lights up on the nightstand. I used to never check his messages. I never needed to. But last night when he was in the shower, I stared at his phone for a full 3 minutes, trying to convince myself to unlock it. I didn't. I want to believe him. I want to believe us. But lately, when I lie awake at night staring at the ceiling fan, I keep thinking about something my mom used to tell me when I was younger. Trust doesn't break in one big moment. It shatters slowly, piece by piece, until you wake up one day and realize you don't recognize the person you're sleeping next to. And God, I don't want to get there, but I can feel the edges starting to splinter. I wish I could tell you that I let it go, that I trusted him the way I always have, the way I promised myself I always would. But the truth, once a thought like that takes root, it's almost impossible to pull it out. It starts small, just a whisper in the back of your mind. But then every little thing you see, Every word, every glance starts feeding it until it's screaming at you. That's where I was in March. It had been about 4 months since Mark started his new job, and Jenna's name had stopped sounding casual when he said it. He didn't bring her up as much anymore, but that didn't make me feel better, it made me feel worse. It was like he realized he'd been talking about her too much and decided to pull back, as if maybe I wouldn't notice, but I did. It was a Wednesday night, March 13th. Funny how you remember exact dates when your stomach drops for the first time. We were supposed to have dinner together at home. I made roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans, one of Mark's favorites. He texted me earlier saying he'd be home by 7. At 6:45, I got a message. Running late, big project. Don't wait up. I stared at the text for a long moment. It wasn't unusual for him to stay late, but something about the way he phrased it felt different. He'd never told me don't wait up before. By 9, I couldn't focus on anything. I had Netflix playing on the TV, but I couldn't even tell you what show I had on. My dinner sat cold on the table while my thoughts spun in circles. At 9:37, I called him. He didn't pick up, and that's when I noticed something. When I called, the call rang twice before going to voicemail. That usually means the phone is on Do Not Disturb, right? I told myself maybe he was in a meeting or on a call with his boss, but deep down I knew he wasn't in a meeting at 9:37 p.m. By 10:10, I was pacing the living room, my chest tight, my thoughts running faster than I could catch them. Then I heard the garage door open. I sat down on the couch and tried to look calm, like I hadn't just spent the last 3 hours spiraling. He walked in, smelling faintly like his cologne mixed with something else I couldn't place, something sweet. Mark was cheerful, almost too cheerful. He kissed me on the forehead, dropped his bag by the door, and said, "Crazy night at work. We had to stay late to finalize a pitch." I nodded, trying to act normal, but inside my mind was screaming. Because here's the thing, I'm not an idiot. I know him. I know the way his face looks when he's telling me the truth, and I know the way it looks when he's not. That night there was something different in his eyes, not guilt exactly, but hesitation, like he was trying to measure every word before he said it. And then the detail that broke me. When he set his phone down on the counter, I glanced at it and saw the lock screen light up. A notification from Slack. Jenna's name. At 10:14 p.m. I couldn't see the message. Just her name. But why was she messaging him at that hour? I told myself I was overthinking, that it could have been work-related, that maybe the pitch story was true, but my gut wouldn't let it go. The next day, I noticed a shift in myself. I became hyper-aware of everything. Every time his phone buzzed, every time he smiled at a text, every time he came home later than usual, I felt my stomach twist. One night, a few days later, I caved. While he was showering, I picked up his phone. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I didn't even know what I was looking for. Maybe proof, maybe reassurance, but there was nothing. No text from Jenna, no messages, no calls, nothing, and that terrified me more than if there had been, because Mark never deletes anything. He's one of those people with 22,000 unread emails, 6 years worth of texts, and old photos from college still on his phone. If there's nothing there, it's because he made sure there's nothing there. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every moment of our relationship, every laugh, every kiss, every time he pulled me close and said I was his person. I kept wondering if I'd missed signs before, if I'd been naive this whole time. It's strange, the way your brain works when you're scared of losing someone. You start cataloging every memory like you're afraid they'll be ripped away from you. The trip we took to New York in 2019 and spent hours walking through Central Park, the time he surprised me with tickets to see Ed Sheeran live because he knew I loved him, the nights we'd stay up until 2 a.m., watching reruns of The Office and laughing until our faces hurt. It all felt fragile now. 2 weeks later, the breaking point came. It was a Friday afternoon. I got off work early and decided to surprise him at the office, something I've never done before. I stopped by his favorite coffee shop, grabbed him a caramel latte, and drove downtown. When I got there, his car was in the lot. I walked inside smiling, expecting to see him at his desk, hunched over his laptop. Instead, I found him in the break room with Jenna. They weren't touching, nothing inappropriate, but they were standing close, too close. He was laughing, leaning in just slightly, the way he does when he's trying to make someone feel special. And Jenna looked at him like he hung the moon. In that moment, something inside me cracked so loudly, I swear I could hear it. Mark saw me almost instantly, his face lighting up in surprise before morphing into something unreadable. Guilt? Shock? Maybe both. I smiled, handed him the coffee, and said nothing. I walked out of that office and sat in my car for 15 full minutes, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. And that's when the panic set in. Not because I'd caught him cheating, I hadn't. There was no smoking gun, no secret hotel receipts, no lipstick on his shirt, but because I realized something worse. I didn't recognize the way he looked at her. And I wasn't sure if he still looked at me the same way anymore. After that day in the break room, nothing felt the same. I came home and went through the motions. Dinner, dishes, laundry, but it was mechanical, like I was watching my life on autopilot. My hands shook sometimes while chopping vegetables, my mind spinning with images of Mark leaning toward her, laughing, the casual intimacy of a look that wasn't meant for me. Sleep became a stranger. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene over and over, imagining conversations he might have had with her that I didn't know about. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that nothing had actually happened. But the truth is, paranoia has a funny way of feeling like clarity. It feels real, tangible, and I couldn't shake it. Even our home felt different. The little apartment we'd made together, the place I thought was our safe haven, suddenly seemed smaller, almost suffocating. I couldn't help but notice little things. The way his clothes smelled faintly of something unfamiliar, the way his laptop was always closed when he left, the way his phone never left his pocket, even when he was relaxing on the couch. I tried to bring it up gently at first. One night while making tea, I asked him if anything had changed with work. He smiled at me, oblivious to the storm raging inside my head, and said everything was fine. But that smile didn't reach his eyes like it used to. I started analyzing every detail of our relationship. Every time he laughed, I'd ask myself if he was really laughing with me, or if he was remembering something she'd said earlier that day. I'd think back to old texts, old conversations, old promises, and wonder if he'd been thinking about someone else all along. It was exhausting. The worst part was that he hadn't actually done anything, nothing concrete, and yet I couldn't stop my mind from racing ahead, imagining betrayals that hadn't even happened yet. I would catch myself daydreaming about confrontations that might never occur, rehearsing conversations in my head late into the night while the city outside my window slept. My friends noticed. I stopped going out. I'd make excuses, saying work was busy or I was tired. But the truth was, I didn't want to explain myself. I didn't want to admit that I was terrified of my own husband, terrified of losing him to someone I barely knew, terrified of the way my own emotions had started to betray me. I remember one Saturday in April, sitting in my car outside the grocery store for 30 minutes before I could summon the courage to go in. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my fingers hurt. I kept thinking, is he texting her right now? Is she at the office? Did he smile at her the way he used to smile at me? I felt like a lunatic. And maybe I was. At home, tension simmered. I couldn't bring myself to look at him the same way. Every touch felt weighted, every kiss laced with suspicion. He seemed confused by my sudden coldness. I wanted to explain, to tell him why I was so distant, but the words wouldn't come out. Because how could I explain paranoia? How could I admit that the thing I feared most might never even happen? We started arguing more. Not big fights, nothing explosive, nothing that friends would notice, but small, insidious arguments that left me feeling drained and guilty. I'd snap at him over trivial things, the way he left a cup in the sink, the way he hummed while doing dishes, the way he always had a story about work. He tried in his own way. He'd ask me if I was okay, if I wanted to talk, and I'd nod, lie, and go to bed pretending to sleep while my mind raced. I began to question myself constantly. Was I being irrational, overly jealous, insecure? I remembered how happy we had been together, how strong our bond felt, and yet something inside me had shifted, and I didn't know how to get it back. Work became my refuge and my torment. I buried myself in projects, deadlines, and emails. It was easier to focus on other people's problems than my own crumbling mental state. But the moment I sat in my car alone, or came home to an empty apartment before Mark got back, the anxiety would come flooding back. I started writing lists. Lists of what I remembered about our relationship. Lists of her social media posts. Lists of every detail I could recall from the break room. It was a way to convince myself that I was rational, that I was just gathering evidence. But the lists didn't calm me. They only reminded me of how much I didn't know, how much I could lose. I even caught myself fantasizing about confrontations. I imagined walking into the office, catching them in a moment of intimacy, screaming at him in the break room. I imagined slamming doors, throwing things, yelling until my voice was hoarse, and then I'd feel a wave of shame wash over me, because I wasn't like that. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't like those women who lose control, but I wasn't myself anymore. April stretched into May, and the anxiety became a constant companion. I found myself checking his phone more often, glancing at notifications, noticing the little details that felt like signs. I hated myself for it. I hated that I couldn't trust him, that my mind had become this war zone of doubt. Mark noticed the change in me, too. He started trying harder, dinners without distractions, weekend trips, thoughtful gestures, but they weren't enough to pierce the fog I was trapped in. I wanted to feel secure, to feel safe again, but every attempt he made reminded me of everything I feared. One night in late May, I sat on the couch, knees pulled to my chest, staring at the muted TV. Mark had gone to the kitchen, humming, and I felt a sudden sharp pang of despair. I realized that my love for him hadn't disappeared. If anything, it had intensified, but it was tangled with fear, jealousy, and a gnawing sense of helplessness. I wondered, in that quiet, terrifying moment, whether love was supposed to feel like this, beautiful, powerful, but also terrifying in its vulnerability. Because the truth was, I didn't just fear losing him. I feared losing the version of us that I had built in my mind, the version of our marriage,
where everything was perfect, where love was a safe harbor. And that fear was slowly eating me alive. By the end of May, I was exhausted. Not just tired, bone deep, soul draining exhaustion that made me question my own sanity. I realized I couldn't continue like this. I couldn't keep walking around in a fog of suspicion, guilt, and anxiety, letting it poison the most important relationship of my life. I didn't know what to do yet. I didn't know if I could trust Mark again, or even if I wanted to. But one thing was clear: I couldn't keep being a passive witness to my own unraveling. Something had to change.
By early June, I realized something crucial. I couldn't wait for things to magically fix themselves. I couldn't keep spinning in circles, torturing myself with endless what ifs and imagined betrayals. The fear, the paranoia, the sleepless nights, they were mine to confront, and if I didn't, they would consume me entirely. So I started small. I began paying attention, not in a voyeuristic way, not to catch him doing something wrong, but to understand the reality of what was happening instead of living in my own head. I started asking questions about work. Casually at first: how was the project today? Did anyone do something funny? I listened carefully, noticing the way he spoke about Jenna, about other colleagues, the small details that revealed the truth. I also started documenting my feelings. Every night I'd sit at the kitchen table with a notebook, writing down everything I'd felt that day, every thought that made me anxious, every flash of jealousy or fear. At first, it felt silly. I'm a grown adult obsessed with a situation that might not even exist, but putting it down on paper made it tangible. It was like untangling a knot that had been tightening in my chest for months. Then I confronted myself. The most difficult confrontation. I asked myself, was I acting on reality or on fear? Was I letting a crush, a spark of attraction between two people, dictate the course of my marriage? Was I punishing Mark for feelings he hadn't acted on? I realized that part of me had been living in a story I was writing myself, a story where I was betrayed, left behind, powerless. And I didn't want to be powerless anymore. So I started taking action. First, I addressed the elephant in the room. One evening, after a long walk by Lady Bird Lake, I told Mark that I had been struggling. I didn't accuse, I didn't demand, I didn't attack. I just spoke from the heart, telling him about my fear, my sleepless nights, my constant anxiety. I told him that seeing him with Jenna had triggered something in me, not because I didn't trust him completely, but because I realized that I hadn't been communicating my feelings honestly. Mark listened, really listened, and that mattered. I could see in his eyes that he wanted to reassure me, to bridge the gap that had formed between us. He didn't get defensive, he didn't brush me off, he simply held my hand and said he understood, that I didn't have to carry this alone. That conversation didn't solve everything, it couldn't, but it was a start. Next, I created boundaries for myself as much as for him. I stopped checking his phone. I stopped analyzing every word, every smile, every message. It was hard at first. My brain would spiral, demanding proof, evidence, some tangible reassurance that everything was fine. But I forced myself to redirect that energy into something productive. My career, my hobbies, my health. I ran longer distances, cooked more elaborate meals, read books I'd been putting off. I made space for myself again. And slowly I began to notice the shift. Mark noticed it too. He started opening up more about his day, about Jenna and other colleagues in a way that was casual but transparent. He invited me to join him for a Friday evening work happy hour, just as a friend, he said, and I went. I listened to him talk, and for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of that old trust. Not complete trust, but enough to know that I could start rebuilding. I also realized something important. My fear of losing him had given me a sense of urgency I hadn't felt before. I started appreciating him more, noticing the little things I'd taken for granted, the way he made my coffee, just the way I liked it, the way he remembered to record my favorite shows, the small jokes we shared that only we understood. I didn't stop feeling anxious completely, of course. The mind doesn't erase months of doubt overnight. But I started questioning my assumptions rather than letting them control me. I started distinguishing between my imagination and reality. I started reclaiming my life from the spiral of paranoia that had gripped me. And then there was a turning point, a subtle but undeniable moment of clarity. It was late July around the 21st. Mark had taken a Friday off and suggested a day trip to Fredericksburg, just the two of us. The sun was warm but not oppressive, the fields of wildflowers bright and endless. We wandered through the town, stopping at local wineries, tasting peach wine and handmade chocolates. We laughed more than we had in months. At one point he looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw the man I had fallen in love with 9 years ago. The same mischief in his eyes, the same warmth, the same effortless charm. I realized then that he hadn't betrayed me, that the fear I'd carried for months was mine to process, not his to answer for. I felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. Relief that my marriage wasn't in pieces, exhaustion from the emotional journey I'd just survived. But most importantly, I felt empowered. I hadn't been a passive participant in my own life. I had confronted my fear, addressed my emotions, and taken steps to reclaim control. It wasn't perfect. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but it was alive. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. And in that moment, I understood something fundamental. Love isn't about never feeling fear. It isn't about never feeling jealousy or doubt. It's about how you respond to those feelings. Do you let them consume you, or do you acknowledge them, work through them, and emerge stronger? I chose the latter. By the end of that summer, things had started to settle. I still notice Jenna now and then. Everyone at work has someone they get along with, but it no longer triggered panic. Mark and I had rebuilt communication. We had reestablished trust, slowly but surely, like repairing a delicate antique. And through it all, I had learned something invaluable about myself, that I was stronger than I realized, more capable of handling emotional storms than I had ever given myself credit for. I didn't know what the future would hold. There are no guarantees in life, and certainly none in love. But I knew one thing. I would never let fear dictate the course of my marriage again. It's strange the way life works. You can spend months, even years, worrying about something that may never happen, only to realize later that the fear was never really about what you were afraid of losing. It was about yourself. By the time August rolled around, Mark and I had found a rhythm again. Not the same carefree rhythm we'd had at the start. Nothing would ever be quite that simple, but a rhythm that felt honest, grounded, and real. I learned to trust myself again first, and that made trusting him easier. I stopped reading into every glance, every word, every subtle smile. Instead, I started observing moments for what they were, not for what I feared they might be. I started appreciating the small things, the way he made me tea on Saturday mornings, the quiet moments on the couch when neither of us said anything, the way he still found ways to make me laugh, even when life felt heavy. There were moments of doubt. Of course, I'm human. A casual message notification would still make my heart skip. I'd see a colleague's name and my mind would wander. But now, instead of spiraling into panic, I'd pause and remind myself, this is reality, not the story I've been telling myself. I also realized that the fear I carried had taught me something about love. It wasn't just about feeling safe or being happy. Love was messy. Love required courage. Love required trusting someone when the whole world, or at least your own mind, tells you not to. Love meant showing up even when your gut twists with doubt and your heart feels heavy. And so I showed up. One evening in late August, we were on our balcony, watching the sun dip behind the Austin skyline. The air was warm, scented with honeysuckle from the garden below. Mark poured us each a glass of wine, a cheap Pinot Noir, but that didn't matter, and we sat together in silence for a while. Then he spoke. I know the past few months have been rough, he said, his voice quiet, measured, and I want you to know you don't have to worry about me. I've never been happier with anyone else than I am with you. I could feel my chest tighten, a mix of relief and emotion, the kind that makes you feel like crying without really knowing why. I wanted to believe him, and I did, but even more, I believed in myself, that I had survived the fear, the doubt, the anxiety, and come out stronger. We talked for hours that night, not about Jenna, not about work, not about anything external, just us, about how we felt, about how we drifted into suspicion, about how we wanted to move forward. It wasn't easy, we didn't solve everything, but it was honest, and that honesty was enough. Looking back, I realize now that my fear had been both a warning and a gift. It warned me that I had been neglecting my own emotions, my own mental health, and my own voice, and it gave me a gift, the realization that I could navigate the storm and still come out whole. In the weeks that followed, our life slowly found balance again. I still work late sometimes. He still stays late sometimes. And yes, he still talks about his colleagues. But the fear no longer rules me. The jealousy no longer paralyzes me. I've learned to let go of the narrative I had created in my head and trust what I see, what I feel, and what I know about the man I love. I also learned to communicate, openly and honestly. I learned that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's strength. That sometimes saying I'm scared or I need reassurance is more powerful than remaining silent. And Mark, he has learned too. He's learned that charm and flirtation, once harmless, can carry consequences. That trust, once strained, needs nurturing, not neglect. That love, when tested, must be treated with care, honesty, and respect. The thing I can't promise, because no one can, is that fear will never creep back. Life is unpredictable. People change, circumstances shift. But what I can promise is that I now have the tools to face it, to speak, to set boundaries, to reclaim my emotional center, to fight for the love that matters. Sometimes, late at night, I'll remember that break room, that fleeting moment when I saw them together, and my heart felt like it had dropped into a pit. I'll remember the panic, the paranoia, the sleepless nights, and I'll smile, quietly because I survived it, because I didn't let fear take over, because I chose trust, not just in him, but in myself. And that choice,
That deliberate, conscious decision is what saved us. Not magic, not luck, not naive hope. Just two people, imperfect and human, facing the fragility of life and love, and choosing each other anyway. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if other challenges will test us, or if new fears will creep in. But I do know this. I'm no longer afraid of my own mind. I'm no longer a prisoner of uncertainty. I'm alive, and so is our love. And for now, that is enough.